It was big, it was bold, it was the last real roar of a brand that wants to find British grit on the roads. The Foden Alpha didn't just roll off the production line, it rolled in with legacy riding on its shoulders. This wasn't some trend-chasing truck built for fleet stats and corporate checklists. It was the final shot from a name that had been in the trenches since steam wagons were king, and when it came out, you could tell this one meant something. The Foden Alpha arrived in the late 90s at a time when the UK trucking scene was shifting fast. The old school toughness was fading. Smooth curves, European designs, and digital dashboards were taking over. But Foden, they still had that attitude, still had the steel, and the Alpha was their way of saying, we're not done yet. Built with a mix of traditional toughness and modern upgrades, it tried to carry the brand into a new era without letting go of what made Foden, Foden. Just looking at it told you everything. The Alpha wasn't trying to be sleek or futuristic. It had bulk. It had purpose. That tall grille, wide cab, and clean line screamed business. You saw one on the motorway, and it looked like it had weight behind its name. It didn't blend in. It didn't want to. And for drivers who grew up in Fodens, who remembered the S21, the 4000 series, the rugged 8-wheelers, the Alpha felt like the last familiar face in a world that was moving on. The cab was one of the most talked about changes. Foden worked with DAF to develop it, which meant better ergonomics, a smoother drive, and a more refined finish. But even with the Dutch input, it still had that British backbone. The chassis, built at the Sandbach plant, was pure Foden. Sturdy, no nonsense, and reliable as hell. The Alpha wasn't a soft truck dressed up in chrome, it was a working machine, plain and simple. You got in, fired up the Cummins engine, and got on with it. Ah, the engine. That's where the Alpha really showed its teeth. Most came fitted with the Cummins ISM or later the ISX. Engines known for their toughness, torque, and serious pulling power. These things weren't built for show. They were built to haul. Whether you were dragging aggregate through Welsh valleys or moving timber across Scottish backroads, the Alpha didn't flinch. It didn't need to be babied, and it didn't complain. It just delivered. Drivers respected it, not because it was flashy, but because it was dependable. It didn't have all the fancy electronic systems of newer models, but that was the point. It was built for real-world hauling, less to go wrong, easier to fix on the fly. And for small operators or owner-drivers, that meant money saved and downtime avoided. If something broke, chances are you could sort it with a toolkit and a bit of know-how. No laptops, no dealer-only codes, just old-fashioned wrench work. But the Alpha's timing, that's where things get painful. Foden was already on thin ice. The market was consolidating. Big European players were tightening their grip. DAF had taken over the brand, and the Sandbach plant, the very heart of Foden, was slowly being choked out. So while the Alpha should have been the start of something bold, it ended up being the swan song, the last true British-built Foden. After that, the name would be slapped on rebadged DAFs until it quietly disappeared. That hit hard, especially for the drivers and mechanics who had spent decades with Foden in their blood. These were the trucks that kept Britain's industry moving through wars, strikes, and economic crashes. And now, it was ending. The Alpha wasn't just a truck, it was a farewell, one last stand, and every mile it ran felt like defiance, a middle finger to the corporates who thought British metal didn't matter anymore. Even today, you'll find a few Alphas still on the road, holding their own, usually owned by guys who know exactly what they've got. You don't drive a Foden Alpha casually, you respect it. You maintain it like it's the last of its kind, because it is. And when one passes you by, it's not just another lorry heading to a quarry or site. It's history on wheels, a rolling reminder of a brand that once built trucks by hand, with pride, in a country that knew how to build them tough. The fall of the Foden Alpha wasn't just about one truck fading out, it was the slow, quiet dismantling of an entire legacy. A brand that once stood shoulder to shoulder with the toughest names in British engineering was now being reduced to a logo. And for drivers, builders, and fans of British trucking, that hurt more than most people will ever know. This wasn't just the end of a production line, it was the lights going out on nearly a century of pride, grit, and diesel-fueled determination. In the early 2000s, things looked promising on paper. Foden still had a loyal following, especially among those running tippers, mixers, and construction hauliers. The Alpha was adaptable. You'd see it spec'd out for quarry work, city deliveries, even some long-haul fleets. It didn't shy away from hard graft. In fact, it thrived in it. The chassis was as tough as anything in its class, and that Cummins power plant just kept pulling day after day with minimal fuss. These trucks were built to work, not pose. But behind the scenes, the story was already written. DAF was now calling the shots, and the focus was on consolidation. Cheaper to build one type of cab, easier to ship one kind of engine, simplify the process, streamline the parts. And so, piece by piece, the British part of Foden started getting shaved off. First it was shared components, then it was badge engineering, and finally, by 2006, Packer, the parent company, made the call that gutted a generation. Foden would be no more. The Sandbach factory closed. The name was shelved. And just like that, one of the oldest and proudest names in UK trucking was gone. The Alpha, caught in the middle of all that, became a symbol of what could have been. It had the bones of a world-class workhorse, the looks of a serious contender, the kind of road presence that didn't need flashy gimmicks, but it also carried the burden of timing. Launched too late to save the brand, too early to benefit from a revival of retro appreciation. It was the right truck, but in the wrong moment. Still, there's something poetic about the Alphas last years. The drivers who ran them knew they were behind the wheel of history. You'd see an Alpha in a tipper fleet covered in mud and dust, working 12-hour shifts like it had something to prove. And maybe it did. Maybe every load it hauled, every steep climb it conquered, every tight corner it navigated was one more punch thrown in a losing fight. Foden may have been winding down, but the Alpha didn't act like it. Some of the best examples were the 6x4 and 8x4 chassis tippers. Absolute monsters in the muck, built to be loaded to the hilt and dumped into chaos. They handled terrain like a bulldozer with a driving license. The torque curve was a thing of beauty. You didn't need to scream it through the gears. It had grunt down low, pulled clean through the rev range, and settled into that low, loping growl that meant business. You'd see them backing into tight yards, pivoting around in wet clay pits, thundering up hillsides, and always, they looked like they belonged there. In some ways, it was the people who ran Alphas that kept the Foden spirit alive longer than anyone expected. These weren't the big box fleets with the newest tech and cushy depots. These were independents, family-run outfits, blokes who knew every creak of the cab, every bolt under the hood. They kept these trucks alive through sheer willpower. Sourcing parts, doing their own repairs, refusing to give up on something that still had fight left in it. You still catch glimpses of Alphas out there, usually weathered, maybe a little faded, but still rolling. Some are show trucks now, restored to their original glory, polished within an inch of their lives. Others are daily drivers, still earning their keep with dignity and power. And every now and then someone will stop and stare, not because it's the newest thing, but because it reminds them of something real, something solid. You don't hear many people talk about the Foden Alpha with marketing buzzwords. They don't say innovative or eco-friendly. They say, that truck got the job done. They say, built like a brick house. They say, never let me down. And honestly, that's the kind of review most drivers still want. It wasn't the flashiest, it wasn't the most modern, but it was the end of the line. The last truck to carry the soul of Foden before it all went quiet. That silence still echoes in places, at truck shows, on old forums, in the corners of scrapyards where a faded badge still shines through the rust. The Alpha may not have saved the brand, but it gave it one hell of a send-off. A proper working class finale, all engine, all effort, no excuses. And maybe that's the legacy. The Foden Alpha didn't ride off into the sunset in glory. It drove straight into the dirt, head held high, load strapped tight, and gears grinding like a warrior refusing to fall. That's not just a truck, that's a statement.